Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm doing a review of Red at the Bone by Jacqueline Woodson. This is a beautiful, short historical fiction centering on a family and looking at their relationships and their history. I thought that this was absolutely so well done, and I really wanted to share with you all of the reasons why I loved it so much. So first, let me tell you what it's about. This centers on a Black family in New York City, a daughter, her parents, and her grandparents who all live together, and really looks at not just their relationships with each other and their identities, but really the historical context and everything that has led to the state that they're in at this point. So this book really starts with, in around 2000, the daughter, who is turning 16, has a coming out party, and everybody's at the coming out party, and she's wearing this gorgeous dress, which is actually a dress that her mother would have worn at her own coming out party when she was 16, except that she was pregnant with the daughter. And so this really sort of starts at that point and delves into each of the characters, examining their backstories and their relationships and their identities in such a beautiful way. So let me go ahead and tell you about why I loved this book so much, starting with the writing and in particular the voice that the author has. So Jacqueline Woodson is somebody who does a lot of poetry and has really gorgeous writing. I read a couple of her other books that are middle grade in verse, including Brown Girl Dreaming and Before the Ever After, both of which I've done reviews for, so I will link below, and they were absolutely gorgeous. This one is not in verse, it is in just regular prose, but it is just as beautiful. I love the way that she writes. She has such gorgeous ways of putting sentences together, but she also is incredibly succinct. This is a very short novel, and she does so much. She packs so much into it with the beauty of her writing. I also think that the voice that she has for each of the characters is so distinct. So this book is told from the perspective of all of these different members of the family, and each one, as they get their chapters talking about their perspectives, has a completely different voice, and you can feel who they are through that writing style alone, as well as through understanding how the history and plot unfolds. Next, I really like the way that this book explores the impact of history. So for these characters, we get an insight not just into their sort of personal histories, but their family histories and the broader context of world history, and all of these play into us understanding where the characters are now. So in terms of the family history, I really like the way that it takes a look at each of the generations, and as well as some of how their previous generations and how they were influenced by the choices that their family members made, or by the lessons that their family members learned and how that was passed on. I really like as well that sort of internal history of each character and how their choices informed their future decisions, and how that informed what they did and how they chose to live their lives. In terms of the broader historical context, the world history, I also like how much of that was brought in. So many really important historical events are touched on in this book in the way that they relate to these individuals in the family. So it's a very close-in view of these big historical events and how that affected the choices that the family made, or the decisions that were open to them, or what they needed to overcome. And I really liked that way that it explored history and its individual impact. Another aspect that I think this book explored really well is that of class and status and wealth. So the family that we're following is sort of an upper middle class family, and it really looks at their status and their wealth and the history of that throughout the years and the ups and downs. It also takes a look at some side characters and their social standing and their wealth and their options because of that. I think this is a really interesting thing to read, especially after having read books like White Rage or We Were 8 Years in Power, which talk about the way that for a lot of Black families, even if their income is equivalent to a middle-class white family, they are much more likely to fall out of the middle class because there's less of a sort of safety net or support system, or just really societal support for who they are and where they are. And this really looks at that. This really looks at how much of a struggle it is for this family to sort of retain that class and status and wealth, and takes a look at other characters who maybe haven't had those chances, or who have had them but then things have happened and they have lost that. And it's just a really fascinating look at kind of how that works in a lot of Black communities, and in particular how this family has weathered the different circumstances and the history and all of these sorts of things, how that has affected their class. In addition to all of these broader contextual issues, there's a lot that is explored on a much more interpersonal level. So this book really takes a look at the idea of connection, the idea of the way that each of these members of the family connect to each other, the way that connection can be both something that's a positive and something that's a negative. It looks at the pull and push between wanting connection and wanting independence, about how different characters might want more of one or the other, and how that informs their choices and their relationships. It is a beautifully explored issue of just what that connection is, what each character wants, and how that affects the way that they interact and the way that they sort of look to make choices in the future. And lastly, I think that on the individual level, I really liked the way that sexuality was explored. A lot of this book really actually looks at sexuality, at the way that sex is used to connect to people, to explore one's own identity, to figure out what you want in life. Sex is a very big part of this book, but in a really interesting way that explores what it means for people and how it is used. So I loved that exploration of the idea of sexuality as well. Overall, I thought that this was a beautifully written novel that explored some really fascinating topics and completely engaged me, made me care so deeply about the characters in so few pages, but was something that very much impacted me deeply. I loved this book so much, and I definitely recommend it. If you guys have read this, or if you've read other things by Jacqueline Woodson or other books that you would recommend to me, or if you just want to chat about this, go ahead and leave me a comment down below.